When winter falls over a quiet mountain town and the world goes silent under the snow, some stories refuse to stay buried. Tonight, we follow the journey of a lone officer on patrol and the desperate signal he discovered beneath the storm. A signal that would lead to an unbelievable rescue, a confrontation with hidden forces, and the rebirth of a bond between man and dog that defied the darkness. As you watch, I invite you to tell us in the comments where you are watching from right now. Your voice is part of this story. And if you believe in loyalty, compassion, and second chances, please press subscribe and help support this channel so we can continue bringing you these heartfelt stories. Winter had laid its white hand over Alpine Creek, a small mountain town tucked between the ridges of the northern ranges, where icy pines stood like watchful sentinels, and every rooftop carried its own mound of frost. The snow that night was not gentle. It was a storm of thick flakes swirling in a furious white dance. Winds howled through the radio towers, knocking signals astray and making communication fragment like broken whispers. Even a town of barely 3,000 souls felt like a forgotten island in a frozen world. Officer Eli Mercer, 36 years old, white male, stood just above 6 feet with a lean, athletic build, shaped by years of patrol and K-9 training. His face carried quiet lines of someone who had seen grief yet learned to walk through it. His brown hair was kept short beneath his winter patrol cap, and his eyes were a muted hazel, sharp when alert, but softened with compassion in quiet moments. Eli's temperament was calm, methodical, respectful, and surprisingly gentle for a man who wore a badge. People in Alpine Creek knew him as someone who never raised his voice unless absolutely required. He had once served with a K-9 partner named Rex, who had died saving his life years earlier during a mountain ambush involving armed poachers. That loss carved a permanent ache in Eli's heart, shaping how he treated every animal he encountered, with a quiet reverence. Eli's SUV moved through the snow-strangled road, headlights slicing through the storm. The radio sputtered with static. Only fragments of dispatch transmissions slipped through. Eli flicked the side of the radio gently, more a habit than a solution. The heater hummed, boots pressed against metal pedals, and outside, everything beyond the windshield was chaos and frost. It was then, through the muffled roar of wind, he heard something. A faint, strained sound, not mechanical, not the crack of ice. It was organic. A cry, a whimper. He slowed the SUV, paused, rolled down the window slightly. Wind bit into his skin, and there it was again. A weak, desperate moan. Eli parked the vehicle and stepped out into the storm, tightening his winter coat. Snow stung his face like sand. He grabbed his flashlight and radio. His voice was steady. "Dispatch, I heard something near the tree line off Hunter's Road. Possible injured animal. I'll investigate." Only partial words crackle back through static. Acknowledged, maintain, contact. The rest dissolved into white noise. Eli raised his flashlight, brushing beams across the trees. Alpine Creek's surrounding forests were dense in winter. The pines, black-green, held their burden of snow like stoic guardians. His boots sank in, leaving deep prints, and the deeper he walked, the more the sound clarified. Not a howl, not wild, but controlled, trapped, and weakened. The beam crossed a shape, dark against white, tied against a tree. It was a German shepherd. Later, he would name him Bruno. But for now, he was simply a suffering being. Bruno appeared around 5 or 6 years old, adult male, with a solid, muscular frame, though visibly thinned by neglect. His fur, normally a majestic mix of sable and black, was frozen stiff in places, crusted with ice. His ears hung slightly instead of standing tall, a sign of both exhaustion and cold. His eyes, though dimmed, still carried sparks of intelligence and alertness. On his paws, Eli noticed something, subtle calluses. Not random, not wild-born. These were working paws, trained paws. Eli stepped closer, carefully, knowing a neglected dog might lash out. But Bruno did not snap. He did not growl. He simply trembled. Eli knelt in the snow, removed one glove for tactile sensitivity, and placed a bare palm gently on Bruno's head. "Easy, buddy. You're all right now. I've got you." Bruno's breathing was shallow but steady. His gaze lifted, and in that look, a sliver of trust flickered. The rope around Bruno's torso and neck was tight, unforgiving. Whoever did this had intent. Not accidental abandonment, but deliberate restraint. Eli examined the knots, too precise, too neat. Someone had experience tying restraining lines, someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Eli's heartbeat hardened, cold, not from weather, but from anger. He reached slowly into his pocket and retrieved his K9 certified rescue knife. Each cut through the rope strands felt symbolic, reversing cruelty knot by knot. Bruno winced a few times, but never panicked. It was as if he understood this human was undoing his suffering. Snow gathered on Eli's shoulders as he worked. Above them, branches swayed, dropping clumps of frost onto the ground. Somewhere far off, a truck engine echoed briefly, then disappeared. At last, the final restraint fell free. Bruno sagged forward, no longer bound, nearly collapsing. Eli caught him, bracing the dog against his chest, feeling the tremors of near hypothermia. He wrapped Bruno in his foil-lined emergency blanket, lifting him with trained care. Bruno was heavy, around 70 pounds, but Eli carried him like something precious and irreplaceable. He hurried back toward the SUV, shielding Bruno's body from wind. Once inside, he placed him on the back seat, turned up the heater, and positioned vents to direct warm air. As Eli pulled the vehicle back onto the road, a flicker of light appeared through his side mirror, a pair of headlights following him from a distance. He squinted, but the storm blurred visibility. Was it another patrol unit? A local resident? Or the person who left Bruno to die? The unknown shadow followed for half a minute, then vanished behind a bend, as if swallowed by the snowfall itself. Eli's grip tightened on the steering wheel. He didn't voice suspicion yet, but his mind already cataloged it. Someone else knew about that dog. Someone was watching. Someone cared, not in a good way, but in a possessive, looming way. The drive to his cabin just outside town, limits took 15 minutes. Eli's cabin was modest, wood-framed, with a stone chimney and a soft glow from inside that looked like warmth incarnate compared to the blizzard outside. Pine smoke drifted up into the icy wind. He parked, stepped out, and carried Bruno inside. There was another character already waiting inside, someone Eli had called earlier in the night. Dr. Grace Lambert, 62, white female, petite, and slightly stooped from years of bending over exam tables. She had a round face with kind wrinkles, graying hair kept in a simple braid, and eyes of pale blue that always seemed to notice more than she mentioned. She had been the town veterinarian for decades. People said she had a gift for sensing unspoken pain, especially in animals. Grace was pragmatic, steady-minded, and compassionate to a fault. She rarely spoke about her personal life, but those who knew her history understood her sorrow. She had lost her son Jacob 2 years earlier, an officer and K9 handler. That loss made Grace's gentleness even more pronounced. Grief had deepened her empathy. She looked up as Eli entered, her eyes sharpening instantly. "Oh, dear Lord, bring him closer to the fire." Eli laid Bruno down gently on a thick blanket near the hearth. Embers glowed warmly. The air inside smelled of pine and wool. Grace fetched her veterinarian kit, the worn leather case snapping open with muscle memory. She withdrew her stethoscope and thermometer. While she examined Bruno, Eli stood close, arms folded, brow furrowed. He looked less like a cop and more like a man haunted by memory. "Who would tie a dog like that? Leave him in that storm?" he asked quietly. Grace murmured, "Someone who wanted him gone, but not discovered." Bruno's breathing equilibrated slowly under heat. His eyelids fluttered, then steadied. His tail made the smallest twitch, the first sign of hope. Eli knelt beside him again, stroking gently near his ears. "You're safe here. You're all right." Bruno's eyes met his, and in them, Eli saw a glimmer of not only trust, but recognition. As the fire crackled behind them and Alpine Creek slept beneath its coat of frost, Eli felt a certainty rising deep within. This dog wasn't lost. He was escaped, and someone would come looking. The hours following Bruno's rescue settled into a rhythm of heat, breath, and quiet recovery. Outside, the storm still raged over Alpine Creek, whipping snow against rooftops, blanketing the forest roads, and burying any lingering tracks beneath fresh layers of white. The wind carried its icy howl along the walls of Eli's cabin, but inside there was warmth, from the fireplace, from the lamplight, and from the fragile flicker of hope in a battered creature's eyes. By dawn, the snowfall had thickened into a dense white curtain. Eli had barely slept, remaining awake beside Bruno's resting form, occasionally dozing upright in his chair. When the first shade of pale morning seeped into the windows, Eli rose stiffly, cracked his back, and prepared a call for animal support transport, though a lingering instinct tugged against handing Bruno over to any official system yet. As he brewed a pot of strong coffee, he checked again through the blurred frost of the window for any lingering lights or tracks. But, as expected, the storm had erased all. Bruno stirred around mid-morning. He attempted to stand, legs still unsteady, but stronger compared to the night before. Eli quickly stepped beside him, steadying the dog with one hand beneath his rib cage. "Slow, buddy. You don't have to rush." As Bruno leaned into him, a new detail revealed itself, something that wouldn't have been noticed in the dark. There were faded impressions on Bruno's fur beneath the neck, not rope burns, but the faint ghost of where a collar used to be. A collar worn long-term, possibly official, possibly removed. Grace returned later that morning, bundled in her long burgundy winter coat and snow boots, her cheeks pink from the cold. She stomped snow off at the threshold and set down a bag of medical supplies. "How's our survivor?" she asked, her voice warm with a quiet expectation. Eli gestured toward Bruno, who now looked slightly more alert, ears lifting fractionally. "He's stubborn enough to stand again." Grace smiled with relief and knelt down beside Bruno. "That's a good sign. Strong spirit. This one wasn't ready to give up." Grace examined the dog more thoroughly in daylight, checking pulse, hydration, dental, joints. Bruno tolerated the examination calmly, almost professionally. He didn't flinch at instruments, didn't resist the touch. He behaved like a trained service animal interacting with a familiar procedure. Grace narrowed her eyes. "He's familiar with medical handling. He's trained to cooperate during exams, just like K-9 units." Eli silently absorbed that. Afterward, while Bruno rested, Eli prepared food, boiled chicken with rice, unseasoned, gentle for recovery. Bruno ate carefully, not ravenously, as though conditioned to controlled consumption, not starved wild, but disciplined. As Bruno ate, they heard a knock at the door, sharp, deliberate, too confident to be neighborly. Eli stiffened. He opened the door to find a man standing just beyond the threshold. Tate Holloway, 39, white male, medium build, but with a taut, wiry strength. His hair was charcoal black, cut short in a clean military style. His features were sharp, cheekbones angular, jaw firm, eyes dark and unreadable. He wore a heavy black coat and gloves, and his boots were military grade, not civilian issue. Tate held himself with rigid posture and a cold aura of control. His voice was smooth, but lacked warmth. "I believe you have a dog in your possession, one that belongs to me." Eli studied him. Tate's manner of speech, assertive rather than pleading, suggested entitlement, not care. "What's your dog's name?" Eli asked evenly. Tate's hesitation was minuscule, but real. "Well, I always just called him the Shepherd." No real owner spoke like that. Eli didn't budge. "And do you have proof of ownership?" Tate's jaw tightened. "I don't need proof. I just need my dog back." Eli stared at him, silent. The tension simmered. Tate glanced past Eli's shoulder, likely spotting Bruno inside. Grace stepped forward slightly, voice calm but loaded. "This dog is still in medical observation. He isn't being released to anyone yet." Tate flicked his gaze at her, brief but sharp. "And you are?" "I'm the veterinarian treating him. That's all you need to know." For a moment, Tate's eyes hardened, like someone denied access to property. Then he gave a curt nod. "This isn't over." And he walked away into the snow, without ever reaching out toward Bruno, without calling his name, without attempting a single reassuring gesture toward the animal he claimed to have lost. As Tate trudged off, Eli noted the boots, military type. Then he noted something else. Tate didn't look at any surrounding snow for tracks or trails. He already knew where Bruno had been. Inside, Grace exhaled slowly. He didn't come here by accident. No, Eli agreed. He came to collect. The rest of the day unfolded with logistical decisions. Official animal services were still unreachable due to storm interference, and a portion of the main road was temporarily closed by snowplow blockages. That gave Eli more time to gather observations. Bruno began showing behavioral signs of trained discipline, responding to sit, without having ever been taught by Eli. He sat at attention with a straight back, ears forward. He responded to hand gestures more than verbal speech. When Eli walked left, Bruno pivoted seamlessly to heel at his left knee. When Eli opened the cabin door and checked the perimeter, Bruno positioned himself not with timid fear, but with alert scanning, like a sentry. It was no longer a question of whether Bruno had been trained. It was only a question of by whom. Later that evening, while the storm subsided into a steady snowfall and the world outside grew quiet, Al-Ostag's vehicle moved down the road, slowly. Its headlights swept over the trees. Eli, standing by the window, saw that it passed once, then circled back, as if observing. His instincts, honed long before this night, flared into full awareness. He turned to Bruno. "You ready for round two?" Bruno's ears lifted. He didn't bark, didn't growl. He simply turned toward the door and waited. Grace, noticing the change, whispered, "That's not a house pet. He's a partner." Sometime past midnight, Eli made a call to the station, this time through his personal encrypted channel. His voice was controlled, dressed in authority. "Run a check on a citizen named Tate Holloway, local or temporary resident. Look for prior military affiliation or security contractor history." Dispatch responded through static. "Will process, may take time, weather delays." Eli then knelt beside Bruno. The dog looked at him with eyes that were no longer clouded by exhaustion, now clear, focused. "Whatever happened to you, it wasn't abandonment, it was extraction," Eli said gently. Bruno leaned forward and pressed his forehead briefly to Eli's hand, a gesture not of fear, but alliance. By the time the fire lowered into embers and the snowfall smoothed the landscape into a seamless field of white, Eli knew something with absolute certainty. Bruno had not merely been tied to a tree. He had escaped someone, or had been meant to never be found, which meant Eli was now part of someone else's unfinished story. Night had fallen again over Alpine Creek, but this was a different kind of night, quieter, heavier, as though the storm itself was now holding its breath. The snow had eased into a soft, steady fall, smoothing the land beneath a white blanket. The town seemed frozen in a moment of waiting. Warm chimneys sent thin trails of smoke into the sky. Lights flickered behind curtains, and the shadows between trees felt watchful. Inside Eli's cabin, the sense of watchfulness was just as present. Bruno lay on a thick rug near the hearth, resting but alert, ears twitching at every crackle of firewood. Grace Lambert, still present for the evening to monitor Bruno's vitals, sat at the small kitchen table with a cup of tea warming her palms. The steam rose to touch the lines on her cheeks, the lines shaped by laughter long ago and by sorrow more recently. Eli stood by the front window, the curtains partially drawn, eyes sweeping the darkness. Every 20 or 30 seconds, he would turn off the lamp to reduce glare on the glass, then scan the tree line, then turn it on again. Grace finally spoke quietly. "You've been doing that every night since you found him." Eli's voice remained low. "Someone followed us after we left the forest. Someone else knows he's here." Grace's gaze drifted toward Bruno. The dog shifted slightly, opening one eye with practiced awareness. Eli finally stepped away from the window and sat across from Grace. His posture was straight, controlled, but his eyes held an intensity that had nothing to do with ordinary policing. "You said you saw something unusual on Bruno this morning. What was it?" Grace took a slow breath, recalling. "Not a physical wound, a behavioral imprint." Eli waited. Grace continued. "When I spoke a phrase, 'Stay alert,' his ears twitched. When I tapped twice near his hind flank, he turned exactly 90 degrees. Eli straightened. Command tapping. Yes. Grace's voice lowered to a near whisper. This dog has been trained for high-risk operations. Eli's fingers tapped softly on the tabletop, a pattern of thought. Then the question is, why was he taken, and why do they want him back now? Grace looked down at her tea, eyes clouded with memory. You know, Jacob, when he worked with his K9, he used to say that handlers and dogs develop a bond deeper than verbal orders. They can feel each other's intent, almost like instinct. Her voice wavered slightly. Bruno and my son, they had that. I know it. Eli had always respected Grace, but in that moment, he felt something deeper, empathy. Losing a K9 partner was devastating. Losing a son doubly so. Before he could speak, Bruno suddenly rose from the rug, not startled, just decisive. He padded over to the door, positioning himself beside it, body facing outward as though standing sentinel. Eli's brows lowered. He hears something. Grace murmured, "What does he hear?" Eli didn't answer. He slipped on his coat and stepped outside. The cold wrapped him instantly, the air sharp, crisp, and listening. He scanned the driveway, the trees, the road beyond. Nothing. Yet Bruno remained by the door, posture tense. Inside again, Eli knelt beside him. "What is it, boy?" Bruno's gaze flicked toward the window, then toward the side of the cabin, where the tree line ran deepest. Eli followed the direction with his eyes, and then he saw it. A figure. At first just a dark smudge against snow, then clearer, standing between the trees. A person, not approaching, not retreating, just watching. Eli stepped forward and opened the door slightly, just enough to address whoever was out there. "Identify yourself," he called sharply. The figure remained still, like a shadow carved into the scenery. Then, something unexpected happened. The figure raised a hand, not in threat, but in greeting, then turned and slipped back into the forest, silent as snowfall. Eli sprinted outside, but by the time he reached the tree line, there was no one. Only a few broken impressions in the snow, prints shaped by heavy boots. He crouched to examine them, military tread again, but larger than Tate's. Back inside, Grace asked, "Was it him?" Eli shook his head. "No, someone else." Grace exhaled slowly. "Which means they're not working alone," Eli finished. Bruno circled once and lay back down, though his eyes stayed fixed on the door. Eli paced. His mind churned. Tate had returned, yes, but someone else was involved, someone who didn't confront, someone observing instead. By midnight, Grace finally departed, the snowfall light enough that she could carefully walk home. Before leaving, she placed a hand on Eli's arm. "Keep him close tonight, and keep yourself close to him." Once the door closed behind her, Eli locked it, set the deadbolt, and pulled the curtains. He turned to Bruno. "Looks like it's just us, partner." Bruno didn't wag his tail. This wasn't joy. This was readiness. He rose and followed Eli, room to room, as Eli checked windows, latches, and blind corners. Finally, they settled. Eli in his armchair, Bruno at his feet. Yet neither fully slept. Around 2 a.m, the radio on Eli's desk crackled, muffled by atmospheric interference. But a message pushed through. "Background check, Tate Holloway, former private contractor, black site detail, expunged records, possible off-grid connections." Eli frowned. Off-grid connections? Meaning unofficial, unmonitored, unaccountable. He whispered, more to himself than to Bruno. "You were part of something organized, then someone wiped your trail, and someone wants you erased permanently." Outside, a gust of wind swayed the branches. Snow pattered softly against the glass. Bruno shifted closer to Eli, pressing against his boot, and Eli, for the first time in years, felt the weight of an old instinct returning, the instinct that comes when a man has a partner again. They were no longer just protector and rescued. They were a team, and someone out there knew it. Morning returned to Alpine Creek with a dim winter sun filtered through pale clouds, its weak light scattering across fields of untouched snow. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind that eerie quiet that only follows violent weather, where it feels as if the world itself is pausing, catching its breath. Smoke rose from chimneys, icicles gleamed against cabin roofs, and deer tracks dotted the far frozen creek. But inside Eli Mercer's cabin, the stillness was different. It was not peace. It was anticipation. Bruno lay by the fire, head resting on his paws, but his ears stayed upright and scanning. He was resting, but never off duty. He reminded Eli of Rex in those early years, always aware, always attuned, always halfway inside a world of instincts and training. Eli ran a hand through his hair and brewed coffee, exhaustion sliding across him in the quiet waves. He had slept maybe 2 hours, if one could call it sleep. Each time he closed his eyes, he expected a knock on the door, or the crunch of footsteps in snow, or the glint of headlights sliding across the window pane. Grace Lambert arrived just before 9 a.m., bundled as always in her coat and boots, but this time carrying a manila folder. She stepped inside and gave Bruno a gentle nod of greeting, which Bruno acknowledged with a quiet lift of his head, a subtle recognition of someone he trusted. Grace's eyes, however, were different this morning, more resolved, more certain. "Eli," she began softly, "I've been thinking about him all night." She placed the folder on the table, her hands trembling slightly, not from cold, but from emotion. "I told myself I wouldn't do this, that reopening old files would only reopen wounds." Eli's eyes softened. "Grace, you don't have to," but she interrupted gently. "No, I do. Because this dog isn't just an animal found in the woods. He's family. He always has been." She opened the folder. Inside were old reports, photos, and documents with police insignias. And, in the center, a picture of a younger man in police uniform kneeling beside a proud German shepherd. Jacob Lambert, white male, 29 at the time of the picture, short golden brown hair, smiling eyes, strong build. In the photo, he had his arm around the shepherd, and Bruno, clean, well-fed, confident, leaned into him. Grace's fingers traced the photo, as though touching the memory of her son. This was taken 6 months before Jacob died. They were an inseparable pair. Bruno trusted Jacob more than anyone. "My son used to say Bruno could sense danger before he could even smell it." Eli pulled the photo gently toward himself. He studied Jacob's posture, balanced, steady, proud, and the dog beside him, focused, loyal, bonded. Grace continued, voice thin. "After Jacob died during the operation in Redwater Gorge, police protocols required Bruno to be reassigned. But he never reached reassignment. His paperwork disappeared. His chip record vanished. They told me Bruno died in the line of duty. They gave me a certificate." Her eyes glistened with restrained emotion. "But they lied." Eli let the truth settle between them, slow and heavy. Bruno was never dead. Bruno had been taken. But by whom? And for what? Grace sat down slowly, as though her knees might buckle. "I think someone wanted him. Someone who knew what he was capable of. Someone who erased his identity so they could use him." Eli's voice was steady, quiet steel. "That someone might be Tate Holloway, and whoever he's working with." Grace nodded, wiping at the corner of her eye. "Tate worked for private contractors, and those groups often don't abide by ethics or law. They train animals for things beyond police work. Security, illegal enforcement, off-record operations." Eli exhaled sharply. "And when Bruno got injured, or resisted, or became inconvenient, they tied him to a tree in the woods to die." Bruno let out a low rumble, not anger, not fear, like a memory stirring. Eli crouched beside him, placing a steady hand on his side. "You didn't fail anyone, Bruno. Someone failed you." Grace took another document from the folder, Jacob's handwriting, a note Jacob had written to her after training completion. "Bruno isn't just a tool. He's a soul. Treat him with humanity, even when others won't." Grace swallowed hard. Jacob would have never let him be treated like property. If he knew Bruno was still alive, Eli finished gently, he would have fought to bring him home. The clock ticked softly against quiet walls, time passing like snowmelt. Then Eli straightened with decision. "We're not going to just protect Bruno. We're going to expose whoever did this, and we're going to make sure they never get near him again." Grace looked at him, grief shifting into gratitude. Jacob would have wanted that. For a moment, silence held, heavy but sacred. Then Bruno stood, not slowly, but with deliberate purpose. He walked toward the door and sat down, gaze fixed. Grace blinked. He remembers something, or someone. Eli grabbed his coat. "Let's see where he wants to go." Grace hesitated. "You're just going to follow him?" "Yes." "But you don't know what you'll find." Eli opened the cabin door. "That's the point." Bruno stepped outside, nose lifted to wind. He didn't run, he tracked, with purpose, with memory, with training. Eli followed him through snow-dusted pines, down a slight ridge, toward the edge of a clearing near the old ranger's tower. There, half buried in snow, was a rusted chain-link kennel, broken, abandoned, used recently. Pieces of rope, claw marks, a strip of black fabric. Bruno sniffed it, stiffened, then sat, staring at it intensely. Eli crouched beside him. "What is this, boy?" Bruno didn't bark, but he looked toward the forest, toward where the watcher stood the previous night. Eli understood immediately. "This wasn't where you were tied. This was where you escaped," Grace whispered behind them. "He broke free. That means he fought to survive." Eli nodded slowly. "And whoever tried to keep him tied here didn't expect him to get out." At that moment, Bruno raised his head and released a single, low, meaningful bark. Not warning, not alert. Declaration. He was ready to reclaim his past, and Eli was ready to help him. Night fell again over Alpine Creek, this time with a gentler snowfall, as if the sky itself wished not to intrude on what was unfolding inside a certain cabin tucked beneath the pines. The moon hung silver above the ridge, and the smoke from Eli Mercer's chimney drifted upward like a whispered prayer. Inside the cabin, warmth took many forms. The orange glow of the fire, the soft lamplight, and the quiet living presence of a German shepherd who had begun to reclaim not only his strength, but his purpose. Bruno lay near the hearth, paws tucked beneath him, chest rising and falling with deep, steady breaths. He was no longer the trembling, half-frozen animal Eli had found in the storm. His fur had regained sheen, his posture regained dignity, and his eyes, sharp amber, held attention and understanding. Eli sat beside him on the rug, leaning back against the armchair. He wore a flannel shirt, jeans, wool socks. The badge he usually wore was now lying on the side table, because tonight wasn't about authority or protocol. Tonight was about something far older: loyalty, grief, longing, redemption. In a quiet voice, Eli began to speak, not to a dog, not to an animal, but to another presence in the room, the memory of a partner he had once walked beside, Rex, the K9 who had saved his life. "You know," Eli said softly, staring into the fire, "there was a day when I thought I'd never work with a dog again." Bruno's ears lifted slightly. Eli continued. "When Rex died, something inside me shut down. I blamed myself for months. I kept asking, why him? Why not me? He didn't hesitate that night. He lunged at the threat before I even registered the danger. It should have been me." He rubbed the bridge of his nose, once, hard. "And ever since that day, it was like walking with half my shadow missing." Bruno slowly stretched forward and placed one paw on Eli's knee, a gentle, intentional touch. Then he looked up at him, not with pity, but with understanding. Eli chuckled weakly. "You're not subtle, are you?" Bruno nudged his hand again, firmly now. "All right," Eli said, voice thickening. "I get it. This isn't a one-way rescue." He took a slow breath, then looked directly into Bruno's eyes. "You didn't just show up in that forest because you were abandoned. You came because you needed someone on the other end of the leash again." Bruno lowered his head gently against Eli's chest. Eli closed his eyes, hand resting in Bruno's fur. For a long minute, the fire crackled and nothing else spoke. Then Eli whispered, "I lost Rex, and Grace lost Jacob, and you lost Jacob too. But now He exhaled slowly. Now, maybe we don't have to lose anything else. Bruno shifted his weight, leaning more fully against Eli. Eli pulled back slightly, looked at him, and said, "I'll protect you. I'll defend you. And whoever did this to you, whoever tried to erase you, we'll make sure they never touch you again." Bruno blinked slowly, a canine's version of acknowledgement. Then, with almost ceremonial calm, he rested his head fully against Eli's torso and closed his eyes. It wasn't submission. It was allegiance, one partner recognizing another. Eli sat there until the fire burned low, the room lit only by embers, the kind of fading glow that made memories brighter. At some point, he felt the need to stand. He rose, crossed to the small wooden desk, and opened the top drawer. Inside was an old leather collar, faded, worn, Rex's collar. He ran a thumb over the nameplate. Rex, K9 Unit. For years, Eli had kept that collar as a shrine to what he'd lost. But tonight, he didn't place it on Bruno. He didn't need to, because Bruno already had an identity. Jacob's partner, survivor of betrayal, and now, ally in justice. Instead, Eli took out a booklet, his official K9 adoption request. It was blank until now. He wrote down Bruno's name, and beside handler, he wrote his own. When he finished, he closed the booklet slowly. A decision had been made. Outside, wind brushed against the cabin, softly, like branches bowing. Bruno stood and stretched, then circled once and settled at Eli's feet. Eli looked down at him. "Yeah, I know. We'll face whatever's coming, together." He leaned down and scratched behind Bruno's ear. "You're not alone anymore." Bruno pressed closer. Neither was Eli. And as the final log in the fireplace cracked open with a warm pop, the vow spoken in silence between them seemed to rise into the room and settle like a mantle. "You found me. Now I'll stand by you." Tomorrow would bring evidence gathering, legal pursuit, confrontation with Tate. But tonight was about healing. Tonight was about honoring the past and opening the door to a new path. Tonight was about two survivors choosing each other, and that choice, quiet and resolute, was the kind that shaped destinies. Winter mornings in Alpine Creek often brought hushed skies and serene light, where sunlight filtered through frost like pale gold through crystal. But on this particular morning, the quiet didn't feel peaceful. It felt purposeful, like the world itself was waiting for something to be set right. It began with the first action of the day. Eli Mercer wasn't just Officer Eli anymore. This morning, he was Investigator Eli. He had arranged a discreet meeting with known cabin owners along the road, where the shadowing vehicles had appeared. These residents, older couples, hunters, snowplow drivers, were accustomed to the rhythm of winter and its peculiarities. But they were also the kind of people who paid attention, and some had cameras. One by one, Eli collected video footage, grainy, snow-distorted, but revealing. In several clips, a black truck with no license plate passed slowly by the cabin at odd hours, lingering, looping back, circling. In 2 frames, Tate Holloway could be seen behind the wheel. But more interesting was a secondary figure, another individual riding passenger in one set of footage, whose face was partially obscured by a hood. Like ghosts caught in pixels, Eli returned to the station later that day with a USB drive of collected surveillance. At the precinct, a modest building of stone and brick in the center of town, he met with Captain Marlowe, a dignified black man in his late 50s with graying temples and a voice that sounded like oak, steady and grounded. Captain Marlowe had a reputation for honesty and a quiet intolerance for corruption. "Let's see what you've got," Marlowe said, leaning over the monitor as Eli played the footage. He watched Tate's face appear in the headlights. He saw the slow cruising, the doubling back. "Not the behavior of someone who simply lost a dog," Eli remarked. "No," Marlowe said. "It's the behavior of someone patrolling possession, checking if his missing asset resurfaced." Grace Lambert later joined them, sitting in the corner, hands clasped tightly. Bruno sat at her feet, calm but alert, almost as though he understood the gravity of the moment. Marlowe then reviewed the other files, documentation about Jacob Lambert's service, the sudden disappearance of Bruno's chip record, and the strange expunging of Bruno's K9 registry after Jacob's death. "And then there's this," Eli said, handing over the message received through encrypted radio the previous night. "Tate Holloway, former private contractor, records expunged, possible off-grid enforcement groups." Marlowe's brow tightened. "This is serious. Groups like that don't release assets willingly." Eli nodded. "I know." Over the next days, in coordination with local law enforcement and backed by Grace's testimony, the town sheriff issued a formal summons requiring Tate Holloway to appear for questioning. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't require sirens. It simply required law. Tate arrived at the station 2 days later, wearing the same black winter coat, shoulders stiff, expression unreadable, but today he didn't walk unchecked. Today he walked into an interview room where Eli Mercer waited with files, footage, and truth. Tate sat down opposite him. Eli remained calm. "You claimed Bruno was your dog." Tate gave a tight smirk. "He is." Eli pressed a printed photo onto the table. Jacob Lambert with Bruno. "This says otherwise." A flicker crossed Tate's face, quick, involuntary. Recognition? Discomfort? Eli continued. "Bruno belonged to Jacob Lambert, a K-9 officer, legally registered through the department and the state. After Jacob's death, Bruno should have returned to police jurisdiction. Instead, records were erased." Tate remained silent. Eli leaned in. "And you had the resources to do it, because you weren't just a dog owner. You were part of a private enforcement group that acquired animals like tools, trained them, used them, and disposed of them when inconvenient." Tate's jaw flexed, but his voice remained cold. "You can't prove that." Eli tapped the USB drive. "We have footage of you stalking the cabin. We have records of you near the wooded site where Bruno was confined. And we have evidence that Bruno had his identification chip removed, professionally." Grace Lambert stepped into the room quietly behind them, her voice trembling not with fear, but with grief, forged determination. "You lied to me? You let me mourn that dog as dead when you knew he was alive. You stole my son's partner." Tate glanced at her, then away. Something inside him shifted, slightly, but not into remorse, more like irritation turning to trapped frustration. The legal process moved swiftly. Alpine Creek might have been small, but its laws were not. In a closed municipal hearing, Tate Holloway faced charges of animal cruelty, unauthorized possession of a law enforcement service animal, tampering with government documentation. But beyond the legal weight, there was another kind of judgment unfolding, something quieter, delivered through glances from townspeople who believed in dignity and decency. Bruno was present at the hearing, calm beside Eli, head held high. At one point, when Tate looked at him, Bruno simply stared back, not aggressively, but with a canine clarity that said, "You lost your claim." The ruling came by midday. Bruno was legally recognized as a K-9 officer formerly belonging to the police department, and under state law, a K-9 who survived service and lost his original handler could be retired into the custody of another certified officer, one who demonstrated bond and care. The judge turned toward Eli. "And Officer Mercer, you may file for immediate adoption." Grace's breath caught, soft but emotional. Eli nodded. "Yes, I already have." After the hearing, outside the courthouse, snow fell lightly, almost celebratory in its gentleness. Eli knelt beside Bruno in the snow, holding a new collar, not Rex's old one, but a fresh one engraved, "Bruno, Mercer family." He carefully fastened it around Bruno's neck. "Welcome home, Bruno." Bruno leaned into him, firmly, fully, pressing his head against Eli's chest in a gesture that wasn't instinct or obedience. It was acceptance. Grace watched with tears warming her eyes. "You'll take good care of him," she whispered. Eli looked up at her. "I'll do more than that. He's family now." For the first time in a long time, Grace smiled without sadness. The town slowly resumed its quiet rhythm. Winter still covered the land, but now inside one cabin on the edge of Alpine Creek, a new household existed, a man marked by loss, but now renewed by companionship, a dog once erased, but now recognized and loved, and a memory, Jacob's memory, not of death, but of continuity. Two beings who had each lost something great, had found something greater, each other. In the end, this story reminds us that God's miracles do not always arrive in thunder or bright signs. Sometimes they come quietly through the loyalty of a dog who refuses to give up, through the courage of a man who chooses compassion over fear, and through the strength God places in ordinary people when they feel they have nothing left. In our everyday lives, we face storms of our own moments of loneliness, anxiety, or doubt. But God walks beside us even then. He guides our steps, protects our families, and sends help in ways we often recognize only afterward. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need encouragement today. Leave a comment to tell us your thoughts, and remember to subscribe so you never miss these stories of faith, courage, and love. May God bless you and your loved ones with peace, protection, and strength wherever you may be. And if you believe in the quiet miracles He sends, type Amen in the comments to affirm your faith. Please support this channel by subscribing so we can continue bringing more stories that warm the heart and honor God's gentle grace.